everyone. I am Simeon. Welcome to the Critical Mass podcast, where we talk about all things ADOS and work to build the critical mass needed to fight for reparations and a transformative Black agenda. For those who don't know, ADOS stands for American Descendants of Slavery. It describes those people whose ancestors were enslaved in these United States of America. This episode of the Critical Mass podcast is sponsored by the ADOS Advocacy Foundation. You can find out more at adosfoundation.org. So let's dive right in. Starting with the introduction of our co-host for today, I'd like to bring up Reggie Stewart. Reggie is our state coordinator for the Massachusetts chapter of the ADOS Advocacy Foundation. So Reggie's going to help us out today and be our co-host. So y'all give a round of applause at home to our brother Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Hey, what's happening, Simeon?
Nothing much, man. What you got going in Massachusetts right now?
Oh man, where to begin? Our chapter is growing. Every time I check the roster, I'm like, oh, there's somebody new here. It's catching on. So the chapter is growing, and we're definitely, becoming a force to be reckoned with in terms of, gaining the respect and the attention of the public, as well as folks in City Hall and in the State House. And I think the way in which the members of the Massachusetts chapter go about advocacy, and the way in which we use a data-driven approach to advocate for or against laws has proven very effective. We're fresh off a reparations listening session, and we did a deep dive not only into the national reparations movement, but also what needs to happen in terms of Boston in order for there to be a transformative Black agenda for the city of Boston and the state of Massachusetts. And we uncovered a lot.
Yeah, Reggie, I had the opportunity to attend that listening session in Boston, which I was completely impressed, one, with the engagement of the community, as well as the engagement of the chapter members there. And I know our guest today also was at that listening session in Boston. So big shout out to all of the advocates in Massachusetts. A big shout out to you, Reggie, for leading that chapter and doing the work there. I want to dive in with our guest today and talk a little bit to our guest. Are you ready to do that? And maybe we can introduce it?
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
Good deal. Well, our guest today is Yvette Carnell. And Yvette Carnell is the founder and president of the ADOS Advocacy Foundation. Previously, she served as staff assistant to U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer, legislative aide to Congressman Marion Barry, and assistant to the chair of Women's Vote Center at the DNC. She also worked as regional field director for America's Families United, where she supervised, mobilized, and coordinated the Get Out the Vote efforts of multiple nonprofit organizations. After leaving Capitol Hill, Avette started a political call-in show on YouTube with almost 90,000 subscribers and co-founded the ADOS movement, the American Descendants of Slavery movement. Avette grew up in Decatur, Georgia. They say it's greater in Decatur. And she attended Howard University, where she earned a bachelor's degree in political science with a minor in philosophy. Please give a critical mass welcome to Yvette Carnell. Hey there, Yvette.
Hey, Simeon, I got more than 90,000 now on YouTube. So.
Okay, that's right. Let's get that number right.
All right.
I know that's right. And I found Yvette Carnell via watching YouTube. Reggie, was that your same experience in finding Avette?
Yeah, it was. Because I always try to. I've always been interested in politics and specifically in Black political discussions, and so I'm watching a little bit of everybody, and then like some years back, this name starts coming up, like this woman said this and this woman said that, and YouTube was on fire. I'm like, what's going on? And so I run into Break It Down and I find out what they're arguing about. And I'm like, this woman is right. And we was off to the races after that.
Long hair, short hair, Yvette, Reggie.
Yeah, it was long hair.
It came early and late. Long hair, short hair, Yvette.
Yeah,
yep.
It was long hair vet for me. It was the hair that I could never even have dreamed of having in my life. It was long hair locked vet that I heard first. And I also got the opportunity to meet you in person at the Angela Project in Alabama. And for me, that was the turning point where I was all in before. And then at the Angela Project, hearing Antonio Moore, hearing Dr. Kevin Cosby, all lay out the data and the information needed for our people to really move politically, just made me a supporter in the fullest. And I take it a step further. It moved from support to mobilization, where I wanted to get out and start trying to affect change. So, Avette, most people know you because of your political stances, and they know you because of things that you said, and your ideology is really ever present now, especially in the fight for reparations and Black politics. But I'd love to know a little bit more about all that came into creating the Yvette Carnell that we see today. I know you're close with your parents, and privately, I've heard you speak about your parents. Can you tell us a little bit, like where you're from, how you became who you are, a little bit about your upbringing?
Simeon's all in my business. No, I am, born and raised in Decatur, right? Two factory workers. And, my mother, that's the whole sharecropping side. My daddy in Ohio came out of that, and here, and that's how they met up. So it's a ADOS working class kind of family. That's what I come out of. And what I try to tell people, though, is you got to speak to where you're from. So, yes, this is a two-parent household. So I can't speak to somebody in a single-parent household in the ghetto of Chicago, because even like working class, lower middle, working class ADOS family is different from somebody who grew up with that as their life. And that's kind of how I know what stability is. My parents worked the same jobs for decades until they retired. So that brought a level of stability to my life that a lot of people did not have. And I feel like, honestly, right now, they don't even understand what it looks like. Oh, we don't want that job. A factory job, you work that job till you retire and you have retirement, that's stability. So I didn't grow up like hungry. I didn't grow up. My daddy brought food home, like from the factory. Like, what you got? You got some bacon? You got some peanut butter? What you got in there? Like, that's what I knew. And so that's kind of where my parents come from and come out of. They come out of like working class ADOS community. And that's why people don't understand the impact of like having a job, like having a stable job that's here in America and then get shipped to Mexico. That's why I have the view I have about immigration, because my parents come out of having stable working class jobs that fed me and helped put me through school. And the reason that I was never hungry or never in need of like the basic essentials is because those jobs hadn't been shipped overseas and they weren't given to people who were not necessarily American. So my view even of immigration doesn't come out of xenophobia. It comes out of like, I see what happens when these two people have work who didn't graduate high school.
That's a strong statement, because to make it in America, as just a normal person, work is a standard, and the stability that comes from that. Where, I know a lot of folks, especially folks who are new here, one of the things that confuses them about ADOS is that we come in all skin complexions. We, you'll see us from the lightest of light to the darkest of dark. Yeah. We're gonna call you bright. So
like right, almost.
we'll see ADOS run kind of the gambit. Same with hair texture. We'll see the extremes in hair texture within ADOS. Can you tell us a little bit, or tell the audience a little bit about bloodline, the importance, and how that kind of changes and makes us who we are as American descendants of slavery?
Well, the thing I always say is like we're an amalgamation. So it's always interesting to me, when we talk about like, oh my God, I can't believe y'all have this woman running this movement and she's white. Like this just, you don't understand. So you don't know where you come from then. Because if you understand where you come from, you understand that in this movement, even in the civil rights movement, we had people who were light, bright, almost white, passing for white, infiltrating the KKK, right? And so in a situation where you have women who don't have control of their bodies, even during slavery, right? And you talk about that. Even in terms of my own bloodline, you talk about that because people talk about, oh my God, you have to have 4 ADOS grandparents. You might have locked me out. I might have 3, not 4. There's a lot that goes on there, right? So even when you talk about that, people don't understand that we're an amalgamation. We're not African. A lot of us had white folk ran through and didn't do what they were supposed to do and ran off. A lot of people got raped. A lot of stuff happened in my bloodline and the rest of ours. So this whole idea that we have that you have to be this African person, that you have to have this blood purity, you have to have this kind of melanin, you have to have this kind of skin color. Yeah, that's just not who we are. That's just not what we are. And we don't have like this blood purity test. We know what we come from. We know the oppression we come from. We know what America has inflicted on us. We know what we share and we know what we created. That's the tie that binds. It's not just like, oh my God, are you dark enough? No, that's just not what we're talking about.
Are you dark enough?
Melanin, envy. You got melanin. That's what remember the child that came over here and told us we had melanin envy?
I'll go ahead, Reggie.
I was just saying, it's so interesting that you brought that up because I was thinking about my great grandmother. When I looked at her birth certificate, I saw African American and Irish, and the story went is that Irish man forced himself on my grandmother, and she has the red hair to prove it, and so. Just kind of those, it's kind of like its own badge of slavery when you see that amalgamation and how that plays out in different people within our community. So like the purity test or paper bags or this and that, it's overly reductive.
On that note, and I'm so glad you brought that up because one of the things that the ADOS Advocacy Foundation, your organization, has made clear is they put out criteria for who would qualify for reparations. And I'd argue that criteria also speaks to exactly who we are. And so I'd like to read it here and love for you to tell me a little bit more about it. One, a person must be a citizen of the United States of America and have identified as Negro, colored, Black, or African American throughout their life on government documentation. So that's the first thing. Second thing, present a government issued ID, birth certificate, or census record identifying a direct ancestor as Negro, colored, Black, or African American before 1965. And 3, trace their ancestry to at least one person that identified as Negro, colored, Black, or who was an enslaved person in the United States between 1776 and 1865. So tell us a little bit more about that. And on the screen, we also have because all of the policies and positions of the ADOS Advocacy Foundation are actually public. So they are online. So Yvette, I'd love to hear a little bit more about who would qualify for reparations and why the ADOS Advocacy Foundation sees those as the major tenets.
Well, you just have to tie the knot to people who have actually suffered, right? You don't want to get in a situation too where people who have identified as white and lived a white life can then go and say, "Hey, wait 1 second. I actually do qualify because I have ADOS, this person as a distant relative. You have sort of this kind of Obama effect. So what you're really trying to do is get the people who have actually suffered from the oppression. So you have to kind of have different knots in there to kind of tie them to the lineage and the oppression from that lineage. So that's why you have to go through something and say who qualifies, because you'll get in a situation where you'll have white folk who qualify, or you'll have quote unquote black folk who don't come from slavery. So you have to put those different little identifiers in there and tie those little knots and have those little criteria. Or you'll have people who didn't suffer saying, "Hey, me too." You'll have other people of color saying, "Hey, I can tie myself to I can find a slave, whatever." So that's why you have those steps involved to say, "Hey, you have to qualify, and this is the way that you have to qualify." And I don't think anybody should have a problem with that.
Mm. When did you recognize that people of color wasn't sufficient? You know what I mean? Like
it didn't take me long to throw that away.
Yeah, but me either. But we heard it. I remember when it first started, when there wasn't a phrase that you would hear regularly. Then all of a sudden it became people of color, those of us of color and things of that nature. So when did you understand, like, hey, that doesn't really describe us and we need to do something a little different?
Well, once you realize that, like, what does it mean? So what does people of color mean? So if you say people of color means melanated people, because that's what from the definition, people of color is just people with melanin who have different hues. That doesn't mean you have any kind of oppression. So you go and you see that people who CEOs from Silicon Valley, a lot of those are Indian Americans. Well, they're darker than me. They're darker than a lot of ADOS people. ADOS, we run the gamut from like me to all the way to somebody who is dark chocolate, right? You can have an Indian American who is darker than that and runs a CEO corporation, gets treated as white, but they're included in people of color, which means that you get to, as a corporation, hire people who are really white in terms of how they get treated in their incomes and their wealth, and not fix us. So you begin to see that is a dodge away from redress. Not only is it not us, but it's a dodge away from fixing us. And once you see that and you see it clearly, you realize that people of color has to go away as a term that kind of like this kind of weird catch-all. You realize that it just shoehorns other groups into our group that never should have been a part of our group, and it made it to where they didn't have to fight their own fight. See, we fought a fight. We had people get killed in the street for what we fought for. Nobody has to fight that fight anymore for themselves. They just get to say, "Oh, I'm just like ADOS," right? "Oh, I'm just like you." Like, we're the same. And they'll come up and tell you, "We're the same, right? We're people of color, right? We're not." And it's like, no, this is the fork in the road. We are not Elon's fork in the road. This is the fork in the road. We're not people of color. We are a people who built the country from chattel slavery, coming all the way here. This is who we are. You got to tell me who you are. And you got to go fight for who you are. You got to go fight for whatever rights you want or need. But that's not the same as me.
Yeah. And go ahead, Reggie.
I think it also, like the people of color, not only is it lazy for those who, because a lot of times when people invoke people of color or global majority or this and that, not only is it lazy, you kind of kill opportunities for solidarity, because in order for solidarity to really work, it has to be for the benefit of all. And if you're not able to identify your different coalition members and what they need, and you just say people of color, it's not going to work. And historically, it hasn't worked. And even as we see within this past election, it doesn't work. Because if I say people of color, and you have the ADOS person over here, and you have the Mexican over here, and you have the Cambodian over here, and you just say people of color, you've just erased a whole different group of people with a whole different set of problems, and you don't know where their struggles come together or diverge. It's lazy. It's lazy politics. It's just. I'm gonna just say it's just to get 501 money. I need the grant, so I'm gonna say buy POC, and I'm gonna get all the money.
And never took off.
By not, because it didn't, because I believe it just added a level of erasure. It allowed people to say that they were doing work while excluding us from the outcomes, or excluding us from the positive outcomes. So I love that the ADOS movement said, no, we're a very particular group. We're not people of color. We're American descendants of slavery. So question for you, and I know you were at Howard. But I think you went at a different time where there was a much larger ADOS specific population. But how did your time at Howard influence, one, your belief and understanding in advocating for government change, and just your positions as you have them now in understanding ADOS and who we are?
Oh, no. I do believe Howard has gotten worse. But I still had to take, as part of political science, Pan-Africanism 1 and 2. So if I do think Howard confused me, because their phrase is leadership for America and the global community. So there was a lot of unlearning after Howard. I'm not saying I didn't learn anything at Howard. We did have professors who were like, you have to be a credit to the race. And when they said a credit to the race, they meant like your lineage, like people coming out of slavery. You're here, you have to do the right thing. But then they had this other piece of the global community. So it was sort of confusing. So you did come out of it with this belief in Wakanda, we are all kind of the same, even though most of what you learned in political science around the civil rights movement and everything that happened before that, because there's a lot of ADOS politics that happens well before the civil rights movement in terms of revolts, uprising, and fighting for freedom and equality. You can trace that all the way back to before the founding. We can talk about Frederick Douglass, whatever. But even as they had that conversation, they had linked all of that to Pan-Africanism, right? And this global struggle, oneness, Wakanda-ish sort of thing. So you have to kind of learn that and kind of get outside of that. Interestingly enough, though, it was actually a Nigerian friend who said the problem with Black Americans talking about us is that you all don't feel that you're anchored in America. And you are more American than you are anything. And those of us who are African know it, right? And so that I could kind of claim that got worming away in my mind. Like, hey, Howard is telling me this, but I have this Nigerian person who is in my school, who is at Howard, who is a friend of mine, telling me that, like, no, this is not right. Like, the way y'all are thinking about this is not right. And so it's very interesting that can be twisted somehow into xenophobia when, like, the person who really said it first was a Nigerian.
Yeah, that's definitely been my experience, in Boston, where I've lived most of my life, because the Black population is incredibly diverse, and they'll be the first ones to tell you, not in a necessarily antagonistic way, but finding out, I need to know where you come from, where you and your people come from, not to put you in a box, but to get to know you, because everybody's from all over the place, and I think those are the building blocks of relationship, of solidarity, of politics. Get to know your coalition partner. Stop being lazy. I go back to the last election. The Democratic Party, that coalition has fractured because they are disconnected from their coalition members, and they wonder why the vote happened the way it happened.
Hey, impromptu, what do y'all think about the new chairs they elected?
Got the white men. Like, America's going, man. Like, Democrats have a problem. They always do what Republicans do. So the Republicans have this Republicans have gone total 1950s white again. And Democrats have been like, well, we're going to elect two white men. That's gonna do it. It's just like they want to go the opposite of it's still identity politics. It's just white identity politics. It's still identity politics, though. You're still electing people based on, like, this thing, this identity. I feel like that's what it was. You got two very normal looking white men just because JD Vance and Trump won. I don't know.
it made me a little, because I just watched like a couple of clips and then I just turned it off. I was like, I can't do this, especially when some of the Black candidates started talking. And as I saw theater and performance and a nod to identity politics without doing the politics for the identity that they represent. And that upset me. And I was like, you know what, all of this, you know what, if I speak.
Well, and it's using our history to help mobilize other groups without doing anything for the groups whose history you're using.
That
right?
It's whole thing that was that with the, like, just pretty much every Black person that came up to throw their hat in the race. That's what I saw, and I'm like, okay, we're just going to be here again in 2028 if y'all keep doing this.
Yep, I never learned anything.
I saw video out there of them dancing after the election. I saw them out there dancing. So hey, you know, I can't help but notice. I also remember when the CBC was out there dancing in Tulsa. And those same people are super quiet right now, as the Justice Department laid out that it's too late to give justice to the people of Tulsa. And it's interesting. They should take back their dances and say, hey, we ain't dancing no more. We fighting for the people of Tulsa and those survivors, but we don't really see it. Well, speaking of the CBC, can we talk a little bit about your time on the Hill? That's such an experience that I know, to even meet someone who spent time working on the Hill, it's kind of rare. It's not like there's just an abundance of people working on the Hill who come back and say, hey, I want to go help ADOS people. So you're one of very few who's come back to the community to say, hey, I have this insight and I want to help my people. So tell us a little bit about your time on the Hill. How did you end up there?
Well, yeah, people usually want to lobby or run for office. Like, just like once you leave here, you usually, you don't make much money on the Hill, so you usually want to like go take that and go finally make some money. Like that's usually the joy of leaving the Hill, finally gonna make some money, right? Not me. What's wrong with me? So the thing about it, politics is the only thing I really ever love. Like in terms of like work, I believe all labor has value. So like I'm not opposed to doing anything else, but in terms of like what brings me joy, it's just like the study of power, and politics is the study of power on like a grand scale, right? So the reason I went to the Hill was because what else you gonna do? That was the reason I majored in like political science. That's the reason I minored in philosophy, because how can you even figure out what your political philosophy is if you don't understand philosophy and the philosophical thinkers who have come about before you, right? How can you understand America if you don't understand John Locke, right? How can you even understand it if you haven't really thought about Hobbes deeply, if you haven't really thought about Rousseau, who came after him? And before, yes, the ADOS philosophical thinkers as well. Before anybody says the Yvette just brought up white people. No, I'm just talking about in general. There's a big world. But I think once you come out of that and you realize that that's what you want to do, and you are in the city to do it, like Howard University is in Washington, D.C. What else are you going to do except put together your resume and send it to Capitol Hill? And I thought about it, and I was just like how can you, if I'm a person who was raised up thinking about the civil rights movement. We watched Eyes on the Prize in high school, right? That PBS documentary. So if you are going to go, and if you love politics and you figure out that, hey, something still needs to happen. I'm still amongst a group of people that the government still owes them something. And right back then, I'm just thinking about policy. Well, you want to go and you go on the Hill, and you probably want to go work for a Democrat. That's my thinking as a 20-something-year-old. Like, yes, I'm gonna graduate and I'm gonna go work for a Democrat. And that's exactly what I did. I worked for two of them, then I went to work for the DNC. Then you kind of realize that, like, even if they're doing good work, they're not doing anything that's really transformative. They're not trying to change the lives of the people on the bottom. They want to make it to where you can live because you need to go vote, right? But nobody's really kind of doing any movement work. The people who work in the DNC got the smallest little office over there cobbled up together. And you realize that like there's nothing happening, right? Even though I work for the Women's Vote Center, like you see there's an African American Vote Center, there are a bunch of little places in there. And you realize that like nobody's really doing anything specific for you. And so I was like, I'm leaving, I'm gone, I'm out of here. And so I worked some regular jobs for a little while, and I realized, no, I just like it. And I feel like when Obama got elected, I was like, I got to go. I got to start talking about this. At least because nobody was saying the thing that I saw. He's not going to do nothing. He's better the first time McCain. But I'm like, he's better than McCain, yeah. But do y'all not see what's happening? Do y'all not see that he's avoiding the big thing the reason that you're electing him, he's walking away from that. He don't want no parts of what you're talking about. And because nobody saw that, that's kind of why I decided, okay, I'm going to get back in this space and start really, really dedicating myself to talking about this in terms of commentary, because nobody is understanding who Obama is, and nobody is interpreting him the way he needs to be interpreted, not as just a person who is slightly better than his opponent, but nobody really understands that this is not like a black man, like a black American man with a white mama. He is a white man with a Kenyan father. And that's the way you have to interpret him. And nobody was doing that. And so that's why I came back and said, we have to talk about it. I have to talk about this. There's no way I cannot talk about this.
What was your experience like after you dropped that article? Because I think about you, and I also think about Cornel West, who was critical at the same time in terms of Obama running from that legacy of slavery that a lot of people were kind of hinging their hope and change on. Cornel saw that he ran from that. So what was your experience with that, and how does it feel for both you and Brother Cornel to kind of come full circle and be like, you know what, they called it?
Oh Lord, the Moors are at the door. But the thing about it is I really don't feel like enough people came around and said, you were right, because we really haven't owned that. It almost feels like people just understood when they got on Obama. What was it when Obama said, y'all got to get out and vote for Kamala, and y'all lucky Michelle and y'all? It's like that moment is when people really, I feel like, came around to the fact that, oh my gosh, this person is not who they said they were. Like, we have totally misunderstood who Obama was. But during that time, Reggie, to answer your question, like, I didn't do anything but catch hell. Like, I remember even the person who I sent the article to when I was writing the article asking me, hey, are you sure you want to do this? Because this might not be something that you want to take on. And in terms of your reputation going on into the future, you might have a problem. So I'm not sure that you want to do this. And I was like, no, I want to do this because, and there was a lot of pushback. And then it was like, well, I'm not sure I want to publish it. Well, wow. I don't know what to tell you, but this is true. And this is happening and this is real. And who he is not who we believe him to be. And he doesn't have our history and our lineage. And that is going to make an impact. So I want to go on record somewhere saying this. I understood enough to know that I want to go on record saying this in 2010. 2010, 11. I want to go on record saying this, regardless of what you think. Because at that moment, I felt like I could see the future. Like, I'm not a superhero, but I was like, this is going to end badly. Right? We have seen him. We've seen his, at that point too, you got to understand what year it is. We've seen him already. Right? This is not something I wrote in 2008. We've seen enough of him to understand who he is. And so I am not only just kind of doing some kind of predictive thing, I am interpreting what I just saw over this past year about what how he's been behaving and what he doesn't understand. And then people didn't get it. People were just happy. Just like it's a lot of right-wing people, a lot of conservatives now who voted for Trump and are just happy. And they don't understand that, like, this could end badly for you too, because you're doing more cheerleading than you are pressuring somebody to act on your behalf. You're getting so hopped up on symbolism. We're not going to do ADOS History Month. We're not going to do Women's History Month. So what? Like, talk to me about outcomes. And I think Americans in general get so caught up in identity politics and, that they don't, hey, this is about outcomes. This is not about canceling something that's largely symbolic because it's going to make people angry or upset, or it's going to hurt this set of people. This is not about that. This is about how are you going to change outcomes. This is not about just anti-woke rhetoric. The same way I understood it back then is, what is Obama going to do specifically for you? Back then we turned red states blue. There has to be something in it for us. And Obama kept saying no. And I was like, this isn't going to end well, because he's telling us no to our face, and he's going to get reelected doing the same thing.
And and for those who don't know and you haven't read the article, it was published September 3rd, 2010. So that's how long you knew the differentiation, or where you actually rang the alarm around the differentiation and the differences, and why flat blackness isn't the right thing. And you titled it Obama's Achilles heel, he's not African American. And one of the quotes, and I just want to read this quote, and then we'll definitely keep moving. But African Americans' expectation was that Obama would display some of the steeliness so overtly recognizable in the African American persona. But President Obama's perspective is international, not African American. And when he was elected, one of the things he said is, I'm the first Kenyan American to be president. And so I think he even understood the differences between him and, I'd say, Michelle, from that nature. He knew the differences. And so it's funny now because, I've heard you get called a Republican. I've heard you get called a Democratic shield. I don't think people even know where to put you, because your thoughts are specifically around the ADOS experience and ADOS outcomes. And so here you are in 2010, pushing back against Democrats in the most public way possible via an article on HuffPost. One of the things that I've heard levied at you in a negative way was that your stance is on immigration. And I think a controversial aspect of that that gets brought up sometime is your work with PFER, which is the Project for Immigration Reform. And I know I've heard you talk about the need to advocate in all rooms, but can you tell us a little bit about your time at PFER and what that was all about?
Absolutely, but I want to just point to something you also said about with Obama, because isn't this something that nobody ever thinks about, why we got a Kenyan American president before we got a Black American president? Nobody ever thinks about like how Kamala got there, and she would have been the first quote unquote Black VP, but we still wouldn't have an ADOS president or vice president. We still wouldn't have had that. So immigration has something to do with that. And it has something to do with who gets elevated in these rooms. And the people who largely get elevated in these rooms are people who don't have what we have in terms of that oppression and don't have that history. And we don't think enough about how many of these first Blacks that we have now are not ADOS. We don't think enough about who Colin Powell was. We only, he's not even, we cheered it, but it's not ADOS either. So when you think about PFER, and I think people have finally come around to it, that immigration does suppress wages, especially low wage earners, is disproportionately us. And the reason I did it, I said, hey, I can be in whatever room I want to. There is this idea that as ADOS, we have to do stuff that the Democratic Party approves of. And I can do and advocate for my people however I decide to advocate for my people. I don't have to go and ask the Democrats, do you approve of how I advocate? Do you approve of me going into this room? Do you approve of me going into this space with people sometimes that I'm not in line with, or they don't share my politics, but on this one thing we agree. And so if I agree with you on this one thing, I'm willing to come to the table and do politics on this one thing. And I think part of the thing is and this is the problem with American politics. You have to check all of these boxes to be a part of this party, or you have to check all the Republican or Democrat. You have to check all the boxes. I don't have to check all the boxes, and I don't have to check in with you. I can feel how I want to feel on a host of different issues and decide I'm going to go in this room with PFER and I'm going to advocate against open borders, because that's what I viewed it that it was. I'm gonna advocate against it, and I'm gonna talk about the way in which it impacts ADOS, and I don't need your permission to do it. So that's why it's always interesting to me, the Democratic shield things, because nobody has fought with Democrats more than me, and nobody's fought with Republicans more than me. I'm not a shield for anybody. I'm just advocating for ADOS as I see fit.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, to advocate as we see fit, because the left and the right, the Democrats and Republicans, both do this, that they funnel us, like in the same way that they funneled us into, like, you can only be cooks and maids, or you can be my porter or my waiter. You, in terms of politics, we can only talk about criminal justice, maybe voting rights. Other than that, you got to shut up. But I believe in this country, like especially us as ADOS, we have earned the right to speak on any and every issue in America because we built America. I get to speak on immigration. I get to speak on economics. I get to speak on foreign policy. I get to speak on housing policy. I get to speak on anything and everything that I choose. And by what right do you tell the builders of this country that I do not get to fully participate in this democracy?
Mm-hmm.
And we're citizens. Like, even outside of building the country, like, we're tax-paying citizens. And part of being American is the right to petition your government for change. And so it's interesting how the most basics of political activity, so many people shun us from doing it and advocating in all rooms. What's something you took away from your experience with PFER?
Well, it's what I took away. Well, that whole thing I took away from is that, there is misinformation on both sides, right? In the sense of, I have a lot of problems with everything that's happening right now in terms of politics. But during that period, it wasn't Republicans who were saying I was a right winger, right? That was Democrats, right? That whole attack on really ADOS as a burgeoning group, if not an organization there, and me, was just an attack on us for thinking. Like, the ability to just think for ourselves. We're not allowed to do that. What I took from that whole period with PFER, because we would just get in there and just talk about immigration. We didn't talk about anything. Okay, what's the effect here? Okay, how do we move here, right? Do you have to market here? Do we need to study here? So these are the kind of conversations I'm having inside. It's not anything wild or different. When you're on the board, you're having conversations about everything from funding to exactly how do we craft a message? How do we get more information? Which government agencies are withholding information about outcomes, and how do we get them to give us that information? So that's the kind of conversation I have. And then I come outside and it's, you're pocketing money from the right wing. You're pocketing money from Trump. And then so you have a whole attack that's based on something that's not even true. And it's really an attack on me for thinking for myself as an ADOS person. We're not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to think for ourselves. We're supposed to do the party line and show up to vote. And we're not supposed to advocate for anything, and we're not supposed to know anything. And that's what I took away from that period. If you don't toe the party line, like the DNC or whoever, if you have a Democratic president, if you don't toe the line of the party, then they will just smear you. And that's all it was, because those smears were coming from high places. Right. Those smears were coming from very high places, very high people. People in news organizations were saying, everybody was saying, I couldn't even show up for an interview without somebody talking about how controversial it was to have a different view on immigration. It was just insane and coordinated.
Yeah, it definitely coordinated. I remember I was so surprised when I heard on CNN you had a commentator who was saying that we were Russian bots as we were advocating. I saw that on MSNBC as well. How do you think Democrats misread and Democrat media's misreading of this moment as we defined ourselves affected Democrats down ballot and through elections?
I think it led to Trump. Really, because I don't think Democrats understand how many people were radicalized around immigration, right? People were telling you, I can't find a job, or because of the labor market. And part of the labor market, especially when you get down to the bottom and up to the top, when you talk about some H-1Bs, part of the reason I can't find a job is because there are people here who are working these jobs. Some of them are being exploited, some of them are making good money, but I can't find a job. And when you have that kind of situation and you have people who are telling the party is supposed to be responsive. So the party is supposed to give you an answer. The party is supposed to say, oh, this is how we're going to find more jobs for you, right? Or show you where you're wrong. We weren't wrong. But instead of doing any of that, the party says, you're just xenophobic. You don't know enough. You're stupid. And people got radicalized around it. It wasn't just ADOS people, but I believe you can lose enough people on the right, people who are normally centrist. People got radicalized around immigration because instead of answering it and talking specifically to the concerns of voters, Democrats said, y'all just don't know enough. Y'all are low information voters. And people said, I'll show you low information.
Yeah, and I think what also happened is that because you spoke to coordinated efforts, early on, we were getting like messages from people within the Democratic Party who were sympathetic to ADOS. Mm-hmm. And they said, MSNBC and these other people, they're coming. They're spreading around the talking points and memos, and this is how they're going to take you down. Like before Joy Reid got on with whoever she got on with, I knew who and when they were coming. This was a coordinated effort because they did not want to answer that specific question about descendants of slavery because it would have been too disruptive to the status quo, and they're paying the price for that now.
And in some ways, we blew up the party. Like in some ways, we did because they didn't answer to it. So when we came in, we say we're specific and we have specific needs, and we want that to be answered to specifically. Democrats is a big umbrella party, and their thing is we gonna do the best we can for everybody. Whether you're Latino, whether you're Black immigrant, whether you're Arab American, whether you are Native American, we're gonna throw everybody in the same pot, and that is our math to win elections. We don't have no new math. But when we came in and said we're ADOS and we have a specific oppression in this country, and we have a specific set of needs, and we're not a part of that pot. When we came and said that blew up their math in terms of how they win elections. And instead of saying, hey, we got to have new math because there's a new group and we got to do these things differently. Instead of doing that, when they decided not to do that, I could say they lost the election there, because even you saw Latinos come out and vote for Trump, and Latino men especially, in larger numbers than anticipated, because you have to speak to specific groups and their specific needs and their specific cultures. And that means there is no real Latino group. The Venezuelans are different than Cubans, are different than Mexican Americans. Everybody's different. And so when we came about, we really gave Democrats the formula to win, but it wasn't their old formula. It's because it wasn't their old formula, they decided to smear us instead of actually doing the work to create a new math to win.
Yeah, even if we go back, I took when you bring the accelerator of mass incarceration as your candidate, you're kind of giving a middle finger to Black voters anyway, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you're kind of saying, and you don't even demand that president do things that will reverse the harm that he already did. And so it's interesting how in today's day and age, everyone acts so surprised. And I even when I listen to someone like Angela Rye, and I remember when that video leaked of her on an HBCU campus saying ADOS were Russian bots.
Yeah.
I remember. So as you're trying
no evidence at all.
Yeah, as you're trying to get our youngest Black young adults involved in the political process, you started off with a lie. Mm-hmm. And I think there's impacts to that.
Oh man, I gotta jump in here, because every time I hear about that Russian bot thing, I get so I get so upset, because I personally went through those Senate reports that they tried to anchor those smears in, and you look at what they claimed Russia to have done, and you see their power map across different social media platforms of how they tried to target Black voters. One of the things that you find is that, number one, yes, we were targeted the most, but they targeted us and tried to trigger us in ways that both parties in this country try to trigger us. So whether it's Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, civil rights, what have you, the Republicans and Democrats try to put those figures and that history in front of us to trigger us to go a certain way. You even had it with Obama and Kamala standing on that Edmund Pettus Bridge, because they knew how that would trigger us. They walk over that bridge every year but don't fight for what those people on that bridge fought for then. And the second thing is when you go a little deeper into those things, you don't find mentions of slavery or reparations within these power maps. You can go look for yourself. It's not there. But what's crazy and what MSNBC and other groups that aligned with the party, Pan-Africanism was in there.
Mm-hmm.
But they're coming to us saying Pan-Africanism is the way forward without admitting or maybe not even knowing that Pan-Africanism was a vector through which Russia tried to influence and sway elections, and it played out in the case we just saw.
Mm-hmm. Played out in prosecutions.
Yep.
100%. Now,
unbelievable.
I think, there's a difference, when you and Antonio Moore came up with the ADOS movement, you defined it heavily around lineage and what we needed to do. I remember watching the first conference and you were like, hey, do Project Takeover, go out and join civic organizations. Can you tell us a little bit about why you felt it was important for advocates to join current civic organizations, specifically ones that have historically fought for Black folks, why that was important at the time?
Well, because you have to, what people tend not to understand is that you have to influence and build. You don't want to, it can't be a thing where you're only building. A lot of people took that as, oh, Yvette doesn't want to do this other thing. You don't want to ever have an org. No, it's also, you want to have influence in all of the orgs that we have because they were built to do a certain thing, right? And right now, I believe all of those orgs are off mission. So if you know what the NAACP was built to do and it's not doing it, why wouldn't you want to influence that organization, which has the best reputation of any organization, in a different direction? So you can build this thing over here, what we talk about ADOS Advocacy Foundation, and that's great what we do. ADOS Empowerment Project, great what we do. ADOS Research Institute, that's great. But we should also have influence in other organizations. This org and these orgs that we have should not be the only space where we have influence. We should have influence and we should have people, and we should be influencing the people that are already over there to build a certain way and think a certain way. Because a lot of times they don't know. They came about in a different era, right? And some of these people don't have access to the information. So part of what we should be doing is influencing them to move in a different direction too.
I'll go even further, Yvette. Some of these people, if you look across the country, within these local chapters or branches, they're kind of waiting for some people to come in and take the reins. Like I've seen, like, even within Massachusetts, like a couple of chapters throughout Central and Western Mass, to where some people that were with the ADOS movement showed up and they were like, "Thank God, please take this on." And it's like, and they're still moving in the direction for reparations today. It's like I remember down in Georgia, y'all were telling me, like, he was like, "Oh, thank God you're here. I need help." And it's and I think the ADOS story, we're all, that's the tie that binds regardless of what organization that you're in. So when you come in and tell the story and you bring the data that Yvette and Antonio have had, it's a lot easier than you might think. You could just take it over.
Yep.
And you, on that note, I want to just commend you, because I think what started as an ideology became a call to action.
Mm-hmm.
It became a galvanizing across the country of people who wanted to fight for our people. And then you took it a step further and created an organization to fight this fight. And that's where you get the ADOS Advocacy Foundation. And just to kind of point out where that is, and for our audience, the ADOS Advocacy Foundation, you can find more at adosfoundation.org, currently has chapters in Georgia, Maryland, North Carolina, New York, New Jersey, California, Mississippi, Missouri, and Massachusetts. In addition, I know that the foundation is looking to start additional chapters in places like Florida, Alabama, and Texas, and Illinois, and Arizona. And so tell us how you decided that there was a need for an organization to fight this fight for reparations and a transformative Black agenda.
Well, and that's the thing people don't get. Oh, it happened organically. Like people, it's like, why didn't it start? Why did you? No, because it started as a conversation about wealth, and then people were like, what are you going to do? Well, what are you going to do? You know, and it's just if you're going to do something, then it has to be organized. This whole idea that we have that something can happen, right? And out of this organization, that you can have an organized fight out of this organization is just insane. So you have to have an organization to do it. You have to have a group of people who are mobilized to do it, and they have to do it in certain areas. Like the agenda, the Black agenda in North Carolina doesn't look like the Black agenda in New York, right? We all have the reparations fight, but you're fighting for resources and a transformative Black agenda wherever you are. You're localizing it. So once you realize that this thing has to happen, then it has to have an apparatus within to do it. It can't just, it doesn't just come out of you just shouting, you owe us a debt. Like you just shouting and banging the table talking about you owe us a debt, you owe us something, you pay up. Like that's not organizing, right? That's not even mobilizing. And mobilizing and organizing are two different things. That's not neither one of those. That's just you getting out some anger. So you realize that, okay, we have to have an organization the same way everything in this country that is ever done, every time we've seen movement in this country in a certain direction, whether you talk about civil rights, whether you talk about the labor movement, whatever you want to talk about, it's come about through organizing. It's come about through different organizations coming together or deciding that we're going to move people in a direction to create change in this country. And so once you kind of know the history of how things happen, how governments are forced to move in this country, you don't have anything else that you can do. You have to start an organization once you commit to it.
Yeah, and I'd go a step further. Like, you're not going to find any point in our history in America where we didn't move forward without organization. Like on the slave ships on the way here, we organized revolts. When we got to the shores, we organized revolts. We organized around the vote. Denmark VZ, and when you go to Black Panthers, when you go to Deacons of Defense, when you go to Malcolm, to Martin, when you go to Fannie Lou Hamer,
Nat Turner,
all of those people organize those efforts. They didn't go off and play Lone Ranger or this superhero type of thing where I'm going to do it. Like, no, when Malcolm spoke, he had people behind him. When Fannie Lou Hamer said, we're going to burn this down if you don't let us in, she had people behind her. This idea that I'm just going to play Lone Ranger and not organize and be accountable to the people that I'm organizing, because I think that's part of where some people get lost because they don't want to be accountable. Without that, you're not going anywhere, except in Twitter Spaces.
Circles. You're going in circles. You're just going to talk in circles. Yeah. You're going to talk in circles. But if all you want to do is have a sales funnel, right? If all you want to do is kind of merchandise the movement and you don't really care if it goes anywhere because your life is okay, then it doesn't matter. So, and I think that's what we have too much of, people who are just willing to merchandise the movement and all they want to do is sell you new things. And they don't want to really create anything. So I think we have to just kind of, at a certain point, we have to grow up politically and kind of decide that that's not enough. We can't just have people who are just using this as marketing for whatever they decide their venture to be. We have to actually do something about it. And that requires mobilization and that requires organization.
Yeah. I tell you this, one thing that really impressed me, and I volunteer with the ADOS Advocacy Foundation. And the thing that impressed me so much was seeing people from around the country utilize their professional abilities for our community. They came in and said, hey, I'm into politics. I'm a writer. I work in public health. I work in housing. I'm a teacher. And they all got together and said, hey, this is some of the things that these are some of the policies and things that we need for our community. So I'd like to encourage our listeners, go to adosfoundation.org. There's a Black agenda that you all have that covers agriculture, Black business, cannabis, climate change, criminal justice, education, environmental racism, health and nutrition, housing, immigration, infrastructure, unemployment, and labor. So tell me why it isn't just reparations, why it isn't just we're just yelling reparations or nothing, but you also have a Black agenda that deals with the policies that we need. Why? What made you think or decide that we needed that in addition to us just fighting for reparations?
Because it's wealth, policies, and rights, right? So yeah, you can fight all day for reparations and we can win. But what happens? You win and you go home and you have environmental racism and the land that you're stuck on, right? Your house that you can't sell because in Cancer Alley, because the company next door is spitting out toxins. Well, you have to have something to be able to fight against that. And we have an EPA that doesn't really do much, even during the Democrats' administration. It doesn't do much to come down against these companies that do this sort of thing. And you can see that even when you talk about the Department of Agriculture and what they've done to ADOS farmers, right, over the years. So you have things that you need in terms of rights, in terms of policies. There are good policies and there are bad policies. And that's gonna be the case as long as we have a government in this country. And you have to have something around that. Just giving someone the wealth that you owe them is not enough. And you have to have even protection for that. Because even if you don't have protection for that, even if you talk about Black business or what we call what is really ADOS business, if you don't have protection around that, then people will use us as prey because there's still going to be bigger businesses. Like you can go and get $1 million tomorrow. You can get paid $1 million reparations tomorrow, and you and 20 of your friends get together. That's still only $20 million. When you're looking at billionaires, a billionaire owns a whole social media platform right now, right? So you look at ways in which, if there is no protection, you look at ways in which these people can just sort of take the money back. And you want to have some protections against that as well. So not only do we need policies, not only are we supposed to have certain rights, not only are we fighting for those sorts of things, even you go back to the Voting Rights Act and all of that, not only that, we still, there are a lot of things that we need to fight for. And reparations is just one thing on that list. A big thing, but it's one.
I love that you brought up agriculture because in the foundation's Black agenda for agriculture, one of the things it talks about is land. And it talks about all of the land that was stolen, that was taken or dispossessed from our community. And I love the whole concept of protections because we've had land before and it got taken. Mm-hmm. And without those protections, anything that we got wouldn't give us what we needed long term, or it wouldn't be able to be passed down, which is the whole concept of an inheritance. Where can people find out more information about you?
Oh, I'm at Breaking, BREAKING, Brown, breaking that brown up, Breaking Brown. The same thing at YouTube, Breaking Brown on YouTube, Yvette Carnell. ADOS, we have ADOSfoundation.org, and we have our Twitter there at ADOS.org. So, I mean, all of those are places. You can find us the same places on Instagram as well. And just look us up.
Before we go, I do have one more topic I want to just touch into, and I'm only going to say 2 words, and I'd love to hear your thoughts when I say these 2 words, okay? Birthright citizenship.
It was misinterpreted so long. It was one of the, when you talk about Reconstruction amendments, that's one of them. And it was meant for slaves and the descendants of slavery. And it just says people. And it doesn't specify, but that's who it was supposed to be about. It was after the Civil War. Hey, we have to make these people citizens. They are citizens now. They get to be here. The slaves and their descendants get to be in this country. And think about how long ago that was. And there was no way for the people who wrote those laws to understand how birthright citizenship would be used to to make everybody who has a child here a citizen, and how globalism would work, how many immigrants would come here. There was no way for them to ever really understand that. So, I think it's high time that people understood that birthright citizenship was really supposed to be about us, and it centers us in the way that it should. It was supposed to always center us. We don't even talk about the way the Statue of Liberty was about us, and it was made to be about immigrants. In certain ways, so much of what was supposed to be our inheritance in this country, even in the terms of how we are understood, got given to other groups. And I think it's time that people understand that. And if that is something that actually the Supreme Court decided to uphold, not the way that Trump did it in terms of the executive order, but just in terms of the interpretation of that, I think that would center us in a way that we haven't been centered in this country in a very long time.
Oh, that was a lot for 2 words. I'm so glad I asked. I'm so glad I asked. I know a lot of folks are running around, and what you see on social media is the concept of you're next. Black folks are next in terms of revoking citizenship and so forth. What do you say to the detractors who want to automatically say that this is ADOS's fight for, citizenship when our ancestors already did the fighting for citizenship?
Well, yeah, we already got it. Birthright is we got a whole civil war was fought over it. So we're here. Unless where you deport people back to, our people, Mississippi, Alabama, right? The Great Migration wasn't us moving country; it was us moving state to state for more opportunity. So unless you want to deport people who are in New York and the Midwest and back to the South, I don't know what we're talking about. We fought that fight already. That's what we're trying to tell everybody. Like that's how we got here. That's the Civil War was fought over us. And after that fight, the Union won. That's what everybody know, the official fight. I'm not talking about the South will rise again, and did. The Ku Klux did come back. But in terms of our citizenship, that fight was already won. And I think people have a hard time really understanding. And I'm talking about all people they're so used to saying, no, you're next. They're so used to being able to think that it's going to be ADOS and using us to be in the forefront of the fight, that they don't even know what to do when we say, no, we're citizens. That fight for us was already fought and won. Like, no, this one is you. You have to fight that. You have to lead the charge here. I'm not going to tell you who's going to be with you or against you, but this is your fight. We're not involved. We won that citizenship thing already.
Yeah, and also I think, not to cut you off, but I think we have to be very careful about how and when and in what way we use our political capital, because it is limited. I think you said something on the show earlier, Yvette, is like, does my voice, is it really needed in this fight? Would it really sway it to the point where I just got to throw all my political capital away? There's enough people, there's a critical mass of people, speaking against what the Trump administration is doing for it to work. Why are you dragging me, a bottom caste, like into this fight and pointing me out specifically, like not going to everybody in the coalition and holding them accountable? You African American, you come over here and help me. I don't like that sense of entitlement to political capital. Politics is still an exchange. Like I have a heart for all the people that are going through this, but you are not entitled to my labor or my capital. Like my ancestors have been there, where people have been entitled to our bodies, to our time, to our labor. Enough. Come in your hand.
Absolutely, Reggie. I don't think people understand. Like, a lot of things can happen to us, but deportation isn't one of them. Right. and they have the inability to wrap their heads around it. And they also can't wrap their heads around the fact that, listen, a lot of Latino men voted for Trump. Right. And so if you want to go and talk to anybody about like how they should be on board, I think you got to start right there. Right. I think you got to start with them. I think you got to have that conversation before you can come to any of the people in talking about, whether we're talking about ADOS AF or ADOS people in general. You have to talk to them. But I think people are so used to talking down to us. They're so used to pointing their finger at us and telling us what you need to do. No. Go and talk to them, because your group really made this happen in terms of this administration. Like the way they broke up the Latino vote, way more than the ADOS vote. So don't talk to me about that. The ADOS vote still went overwhelmingly for Harris, regardless of what I did or anybody else did. So you got to go talk to the people you got to talk to. And that's going to be an uncomfortable conversation that you don't want to have, but you got to go have it before you come and stand in my face.
There's levels to this.
Look, and I just imagine someone coming and trying to stand in your face, having a different conversation. That ain't gonna go well. Hey, so before we roll for real this time, I see on the ADOS Foundation website, Justice for Generations, which is a campaign to fund the creation of a comprehensive ADOS reparations bill. Why do we need our own bill instead of some of the bills like HR 40 that we see out there right now?
Well, it doesn't have any teeth. Like HR 40 doesn't have any money. It's not specific to ADOS in terms of a lineage. So it doesn't, it's really, and you think about it, the people who brought it, they said, like you have run down, you said, we just brought it to teach. It really wasn't supposed to be real legislation. And because of that, it looks like something and reads like something that wasn't supposed to be real legislation. And so we have to do something different. And we initially tried to support that bill, and people who were a part of those Pan-Africanist groups came and said, that's our bill. We got this bunch of co-sponsors on it, and they said, and they took it and took off running with it like they were playing football. So we said, listen, it wasn't the greatest anyway. We tried to support it, didn't work. So now we have to do something we have to do our thing now. We have to do something that has teeth. We know that we can create a much better piece of legislation in terms of a reparations framework, which we unveiled at the Reparations Summit. So if you can do a better job, you should. And so this is our way to fund a bill that does a much better job than HR 40 ever did during this time. So this is our way of doing that.
Well, on that, if you're interested in getting involved, you can go to joinados.com to become a member. You may need a chapter in your area, and the only way that happens is with each of you out there. You can also donate to our Justice for Generations campaign at adosfoundation.org. For those of us who are actually watching, there's a QR code up there on the screen. One thing I love about the ADOS movement, and specifically about the ADOS Advocacy Foundation, is that there are just people who are working hard to make something happen for our people as a whole. And I love the unity in seeing ADOS people across the country advocate together. Avette, it has been a pleasure getting to talk to you today. As president of the ADOS Advocacy Foundation, your work is so pivotal to what needs to happen in our country and in our communities. On that, Reggie, I'd love to throw it to you if you have anything to throw out there, and then Avette, we'll let you get the last word.
No, just keep your eyes on on Boston, on Massachusetts. A lot of great things are on the horizon. Now is a great time to join a chapter if you're in the state of Massachusetts. It's what 2025 is going to be a ride.
Well, I just want to say to everybody, listen, we have done the experiment into whether or not being unorganized and loud works over the last few years. We've seen a lot of people do that. And we have seen that fail every time. And this idea that you just have to get the culture together doesn't work. And so I just invite everybody to be a part of something, to be a part of something meaningful, to be a part of something real, to be a part of a political movement. Like I said, we gave everybody enough time to run that experiment. It hasn't worked. And so we still invite everybody to come here and be a part of what we're building and what we're doing.
Thank you so much. Big shout out to our co-host, Reggie Stewart, our guest president, Yvette Carnell. Again, I'm Simeon Harris with the Critical Mass Podcast. Hope you all have a great rest of your time viewing. Take care.